potentially decisive chunk of voters. It should be no surprise then that Trump's attorneys are trying anything and everything to end the gag order, even writing to Judge Juan Merchan, arguing that Trump is owed special consideration because he's running for president. To that, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg said that the trial ending does not mean everyone's out of the woods just yet. Donald Trump's journey through New York's criminal justice system has only just begun. Prosecutors telling Judge Merchan this, quote, "The court has an obligation to protect the integrity of these proceedings and the fair administration of justice, at least through the sentencing hearing and the resolution of any post-trial motions." The ex-president is set to be sentenced on July 11th. Donald Trump remaining under a gag order limiting what he can say in the historic hush money election interference case that resulted in his guilty conviction is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is back with us. Also joining us, chief political columnist and host of the podcast In Politique for Puck, MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilman's back. Former SDNY criminal division deputy chief, MSNBC legal analyst Christy Greenberg's back, and writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, is back. Vaughn Hilliard, I am always astounded by Trump's ability to analyze a poll that's bad for him. And the worst poll for him is the number of independents that, one, believe the facts of this case, two, believe he's guilty. Hello to whoever's dog is joining us. I'm sorry you didn't get an intro. And the idea that Trump wants to lift the gag is so, you know, we're in year 9 and we're so accustomed to, well, of course he wants to attack the prosecutors. He wants to attack the prosecutors to help his campaign. That's some sick stuff.
Right. When we're talking about the polls, Nicole, I think that there is plenty of reason to be concerned about the underlying numbers. If you're Joe Biden's campaign or Donald Trump's campaign, when you're looking at the head-to-head matchup. But the one thing that I constantly look at with the polls is shifts that we see, because I think that that is at least a baseline number that we can compare on a timeline to one another. And what you have seen coming out of the guilty verdict is a shift among particularly independents away from Donald Trump. And if you are his camp, this should be of paramount concern. It was independents or reticent conservatives who really shifted the entire dynamic of the 2020 race and what was a narrow outcome in Joe Biden's favor here. And so for Donald Trump, he is quick to highlight the polls that are showing him up in favor. But when you're looking at these sort of polls, these are difficult realities, and especially when you have agreed to go in a one-on-one matchup at a debate on June 27th, which we're now just 9 days away from. This is a moment here where having the gag order remain in place means that you are not able to effectively undercut something that clearly voters have atop their mind and feel is a vulnerability for you and your campaign.
I mean, Heilman, it's an important reveal, I think, of Trump's constant shoving all of this through a political sieve. I mean, there really isn't, because his legal strategy has always been a political solution, right? His legal solution to all of his criminality and criming has always been to be president again, just pardon himself and prosecute and jail the state prosecutors where he can't pardon himself. And I think what's remarkable and what our team talked about today is, I love J.B. Pritzker saying yesterday, we're all in the pot. You know, we're all in the pot. It's been such a slow boil. We're so accustomed to him attacking the rule of law, attacking prosecutors, attacking anyone that threatens him legally, that we don't always sort of stop and, you know, why does he want to be out of the gag order? Why does he want to be able to attack Judge Juan Merchan and Michael Cohen? Because the things they testified to damage him.
Well, I think it's clearly the case. That's clearly the case, Nicole. There's no doubt that the Trump team is looking at, although they're not acknowledging, and in fact often saying the opposite, they're looking at the same sets of numbers that the Biden campaign is looking at, and that you can see in the public polling, which is not that this guilty verdict has won the race for Joe Biden by any stretch, and not that anybody, not in any definitive way, even proves that any votes will be changed by it by the time we get to November. But they have seen the unknown that we had faced, which what if a former president gets convicted? What if he gets convicted on all the counts he's been charged with? What will happen to public opinion? What we've seen is a small But in a race that's, as I say over and over again, it's a margin of error race that's going to be won on the margins, won or lost on the margins. And so in a small and potentially decisive sliver of voters, it has moved the needle for now. They see that as clearly as I said, everybody else does. And so, yes, I mean, they want to discredit, to try to get those numbers back under control. They'd rather throw as much doubt on the verdict as possible. The verdict, the most direct place to throw doubt on the verdict is to throw it at the jurors and to throw it at the court and to throw it at the judge. And that's what's been Trump's strategy all along. It's also the case that they know that several things now are going to happen that could worsen his position politically. One of them, we see this also in the polling, is that a jail sentence, whether it's deferred or immediate, much more likely deferred than immediate, but a prison sentence hurts him in the polls, drives home the severity of the crimes. And he is going to appeal. But between now and November, a sweeping guilty verdict backed with potentially a significant penalty is bad for him politically, and he wants to get as early a start as possible in trying to discredit everything about that so that he can gain back what small but crucial ground he seems to have lost in the polling because of this outcome.
Yeah, I mean, Amanda, I just think back to the, it's hard to have a lot of memories of the Republican primary because it was so hapless, it was so uninspired, and it was so short. But I remember learning that I think it was Chris Christie's campaign had polling data that showed just what's come to bear, just what John and Vaughn are talking about, that among the voters that each side is fighting to swing over by November, they're late deciders, they're consumers of news. They engage late, and they care very much about a guilty conviction, especially on these facts. This is the only case of the four that Trump doesn't talk about on the stump. He brags about stealing classified stuff, so he's talking about the PRA, Presidential Records Act. He's now calling the insurrectionists from January 6th warriors. He doesn't ever talk about his, collusion with David Pecker to smear Ted Cruz. He talks about the others as an asset. He knows these facts are terrible for him politically.
Yeah, I think he does recognize that, but he's also a person, I think we've all learned, who doesn't look at the polls and then decide how to calibrate his position. He takes a position and then tries to bend reality to it. And I think you see that in his pushing back against these gag orders. And for the record, I don't like that they're called gag orders because it plays into the narrative that he is promoting, that he is being somehow unconstitutionally, unfairly gagged by a system that's being weaponized against him. And so I think a lot of work needs to be done exactly explaining what these gag orders are meant to do. All they're essentially, in a nutshell, designed to do is to make sure that he doesn't foment violence against the process, against the judges, the jury, the prosecutors, et cetera, to keep the process safe. And that is not a high standard for anyone, let alone someone who is a presidential candidate. But what really worries me, Nicole, is that I don't see just Donald Trump making that argument. Earlier today, there was a news story that a couple dozen Republican state attorneys general, people who in red states are supposed to be the keepers of law and order, sent a letter essentially decrying Jack Smith pursuing a gag order when it came to the classified documents case. And so I think that the smart set politically around Trump, who's trying to bend this reality to his insane argument, are saying, you know what, we're just going to look past the hush money trial. We're going to go against these gag orders on these other cases, and going into the convention, going into sentencing, talk about how this is just more evidence that he is having the justice system unfairly weaponized against him. That is false, but I fully expect that is what is going to happen. People need to be prepared to push back against that and explain these orders are designed to keep the system safe. And he is free to speak, but he is not free to foment violence like we saw in the other presidential debate he had with Joe Biden, where he had the famous quote where Chris Wallace asked him, will you denounce the Proud Boys? And he called him up, stand back and stand by.
Well, Amanda, we covered yesterday. Trump is doing just that. He wants to continue to lie about the FBI. His lie there is viewed by Merrick Garland and Jack Smith and the FBI as representing a very active and clear danger to the FBI workforce. It is clear that what you're describing is their strategy.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't, but I think, Trump doesn't hide the ball on things like many authoritarians. He tells you exactly what his plans are. We should believe him. We should be watching exactly how the Republican Party is coalescing around these radical positions that in the Republican Party that you and I grew up in, Nicole, would have been rejected outright. But because Donald Trump has taken the position, they're trying to retrofit all these legal philosophy and arguments to try to make it acceptable. And that is what needs to be explained and pushed back against going into the summer.
All right, Christy, I mean, the threat of violence, once again, isn't abstract. This is Michael Cohen's lawyer, Danya Perry, describing the threat environment he continues to live under. Let me play this for you.
As much as Michael is feeling relieved that the trial is over and gratified by the jury's verdict, he also is feeling fearful, and properly so, given the continued attacks, even under the gag order. And so I think he is prepared for that. I mean, one can never be truly prepared. He's certainly concerned. And we're going to do whatever we can, as we have in the past. But he's certainly concerned that if Trump is reelected, that nothing that I can do or any lawyer can do is really going to be able to help him avoid threats to his safety and to his liberty.
Christy, just talk about what the judge will take into consideration. I know that lifting the gag order isn't on the table for Donald Trump, but in terms of his sentencing, does all this pushing against it impact what the judge is thinking about for July 11th?
So I think it factors into both continued proceedings on the gag order and his sentencing on July 11th. We saw with respect to the gag order, the mid-level appellate court saying this gag order is necessary because of Donald Trump's violent rhetoric. And pointing to, the DA's office pointed to death threats that the DA was getting, the DA's staffer was getting. And we're seeing, real intimidation against Donald Trump's direct targets. And so when looking at this gag order, the appellate division said, look, this is necessary. We need this because these threats are so dangerous to the people who are participants in this proceeding. And the proceeding isn't over. We are leading towards sentencing. And so Donald Trump is desperate to attack Matthew Colangelo, who's one of the prosecutors who came from DOJ, to say that he's some Biden plant, which of course he isn't, and to also attack the judge's daughter. Those are the two targets he really wants to talk about. And those are two people who I think, if the gag order was lifted, would just continue to be subjected to even worse threats than presumably they already have seen. So we haven't gotten the DA's response yet to Donald Trump's motion to lift that gag order. But I expect that what we will see in that response is a lot of details about the threats that have been received throughout this trial and the fact that those threats probably got worse and not better since the guilty verdict came down. And as to the sentencing, yes, this absolutely is going to be taken into account. With respect to sentencing, I mean, Donald Trump has violated the gag order even after the verdict, talking about the jurors, saying the jurors didn't smile at him, which, by the way, they don't smile at criminal defendants in trials. But any statements about them, that is putting a target at them. And NBC's own Ryan Riley has talked about efforts online to identify these jurors and threaten them. So as we approach sentencing, these harrowing kinds of threats are only going to intensify. And so it is important for the gag order to both remain in place and for Judge Merchan to take all of this into account when sentencing Donald Trump to what I think should be a jail sentence.
Vaughn, as Christy and Amanda are talking about the threats, and Amanda reminds us what Trump did last time he was on a debate stage. I mean,